So like most guitar players, my big weakness probably is overdrive pedals. I am forever buying different overdrive pedals, chopping and changing things, trying different combinations, and I'm always kind of searching for that one pedal that gives me everything I want. Now, as you know, that doesn't really exist on the market because every single overdrive pedal has its own thing and its own vibe, which is what makes it unique. But what if I told you there was a pedal that could pretty much do everything you'd ever want an overdrive pedal to do? In this video, we're going to check out that pedal. That is this thing. This is the Ridge from Kernom. So the Ridge from Kernom is what they refer to as an Augmented Overdrive. So what that means is that this pedal doesn't really have a voice of its own. This is essentially every single overdrive pedal you could basically imagine in a single box. Now, I don't know much about the technology that makes that work, but what I do know is it works incredibly well. I've been using this pedal a lot for the last few months in other videos and just in my day-to-day playing, and I've actually been astounded by the range of tones I can get from this thing. So the idea behind this is you can make it do anything from a super clean, transparent boost right through to some tones that are verging on fuzz, which is super compressed. There's some great classic rock tones in there. There's some high gain tones in there. There's basically everything you can think of. And also, if you want to spend time to really dial it in, you could actually make this mimic other guitar pedals as well. You could take your favorite overdrive that perhaps you don't want to take out on the road for whatever reason, and you could dial that sound into this and use this as that pedal's equivalent. Or if there's pedals that you want that are unobtainable for financial reasons because they're very expensive or very rare, you could probably use this to recreate that sound. It's a very clever pedal, and like I said, I don't really know how it works, but I really like what it does. The idea behind the augmented technology is that it kind of replicates everything from silicon to germanium, clipping diodes with whatever the guys at Kernom have done to the inside of this. So it's a very, very cool pedal. So before we go into the specs of this thing, I just want to let you guys know that I'm not getting paid for this video, but the guys at Kernom have given me this pedal in return for making this video. But as always, all the thoughts and opinions you can hear in the video are my own. So first of all, visually, this is quite a striking pedal. It's all white with some very, very subtle black text on there. It's very, very futuristic looking. It's got these kind of sharp, sleek edges. It's very well designed. The edges are pretty sharp. I mean, if you threw this at someone, you could do some damage. But yeah, it's really solid. It's quite a heavy pedal. It comes in at just under 2 pounds, I believe, which is a good sign for if you're going to take this out on tour, because you know it's going to stand up to a bit of a beating every single night. Now, I really like that they've gone for this super sleek futuristic look. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with how this thing works. Everything is controlled with these 6 knobs on top of the pedal. So we have a volume knob, which obviously gives you your volume control. So you can either set that at unity or you can use it to boost your signal. Then we have the mid control here. Now this control and these 2 controls here each have a point in the middle at 12 o'clock where they kind of lock into position. This is the most neutral point for that tone pot. So if you wanted just a neutral mid sound, you could just leave it there. If you turn it down, it scoops the mid-range, and obviously turning it up increases the mid-range. Then we have these 2 at the bottom. Now this is where the magic really happens. So the first one is called the post-tone, and then we have the pre-tone. Now these are kind of the same thing, but they work in different ways. So the pre-tone works with your guitar signal. So what we can do here is we can darken or brighten the guitar signal that the pedal is seeing. Now obviously if you use different guitars with different overdrive pedals, the signal that the pedal adds its own EQ flavor and overdrive to is dependent on what you feed into it. So with that control, we can control how dark or bright it sees the input signal. And then with this control, we can control how dark or bright it sees the output signal. So it's kind of like an in and an out EQ there. We have the mood knob. This is the real secret to this pedal. You'll notice there's 5 different segments on the dial there. Each one is colored slightly different. So if you're trying to dial in different overdrive flavors, those 5 segments are going to be really useful because inside those segments, you've still got a usable range of sound. But let's say you're going through each of the segments. The first segment from there to there is all very clean, very transparent sounding, basically clean boost tones. Once we get into the second segment, which is there to there, we have a transparent but dynamic overdrive sound. So we're starting to go into like our kind of clon territories. The third segment here, we're going into a more pronounced colored overdrive. So think of that as being more like, you know, your kind of pushed mid overdrives, maybe like a tube screamer type thing. Then the fourth segment, which is here to here, is a more high gain overdrive. So that's where we're really going to have some fun with the high gain sounds. And then when we get to this fifth segment, this is like super compressed, kind of fuzzy, very boomy, really good for some really beefy sounds or if you want to really fatten up some single coils. And then the last thing is the gain control, and that obviously just determines how much of the overdrive you're adding to the signal. Obviously this control is reactive to this control, so in this setting, this is going to have way more gain on tap compared to this setting, for instance, where this will do a lot less in that position. This technically is just a single-sided overdrive, which we control with the on and off switch, but there is a preset as well. So you can set the pedal to however you want it and save a preset, and then you can change the knobs and use that as your on and off side. And then when you press this button, it will recall the preset independent of what everything else here is set to. So that's quite cool because if you've got a favorite sound that you want to use for solos, for instance, you can set that up as a preset and then use the pedal interface then to use your kind of day-to-day sound, and you can recall your preset at any time. The cool thing is when you turn the preset off, the pedal automatically defaults back to what you've set it to. So even though it is kind of a single-sided pedal, you can use the preset to create a second side to the pedal as well. All the connectivity for the pedal is on the rear of the unit, so we've got the in and the out, which are quite self-explanatory. An expression pedal jack, which is for an expression pedal which can be used to control any parameter on top of the pedal. We've got MIDI. With MIDI, you can use 128 different presets. So in theory, you could have this pedal and a MIDI switcher and basically dial this in to be like 128 different overdrive pedals. And you could probably make a model of every single overdrive pedal you can find and use just this and recall all those mid-show if you want. That's one way you could use this. And it runs off a standard 9-volt DC. Close up, you can kind of see the real kind of futuristic edges of this pedal nicely as well. It's quite a big pedal. It's around the sort of size of a Klon. It's that kind of size. I think a Klon is maybe a little taller. But it's going to take a bit of real estate on the board, but you get a lot out of this. You could basically think of this, if you're using this in a MIDI switcher, it's like fitting 128 pedals into a space that size on your pedal board. So yeah, that is pretty much it spec-wise. The magic really happens with, the sound of this thing when we plug this thing in. It's quite simple to get started with, but it can do a lot. So I'm going to plug this thing in now and we'll hear what it sounds like. Alright, so gear-wise, I'm using the LT Custom Guitars Privateer Standard. This is kind of like a modern single cut. It's got a humbucker in the bridge and a P90 in the neck with some split coil tones. This is plugged into the Blackstar Studio 10 6L6, which is running completely clean, and that's going via the 2-notes Torpedo Captor X. So here's how the amp sounds completely clean. So the first thing I'm going to do is everything set to midnight, including the mood knob, the pre and post tones, the drive, everything else. The only thing that's not is the volume. That's set to a little boost above unity gain just to give a little lift. I can push that a lot more, but it's a very wide-ranging volume control. So if I turn that up full, it's really going to kick the front of the amp. So here's how it sounds with everything at midnight. Now you can hear that isn't a ton of gain. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the mood control and show you what that does. So in the lowest range, it's going to be just like a clean boost. So even if I play like this, now there's not really a lot of volume there. This is where we can boost the volume a little bit. The whole point of this mode is to hit the amp a little harder. Even if I turn the gain up full, we're only getting a sort of a touch of overdrive there. It's not a huge overdrive sound. So that's really just functioning as a clean boost. Inside the range, obviously we have an entire range of sweep from there to there. You can hear that adds just a little bit extra boost. That's where the pedal starts to engage that augmented idea with the different clipping diodes. And because it's pushing more clipping, because I'm kind of at the top of that clean boost range there, the volume control becomes a lot more sensitive. So obviously I'm turning that down a little bit. If I go into that second range, we're going to add a little bit more gain. So we're kind of going just over the edge of boost here. The third range is where we really get into like overdrive. So this is where we start to get into like our tube screamer type sounds. And I should mention I'm just using tube screamer as a reference there. It doesn't sound exactly like a tube screamer. That's just the sort of gain levels we can expect. So if you're a blues player or a rock player, that's probably where you're going to start living with this pedal, that kind of gain range, even with the drive up full. That's not a super high gain sound. It's a very nice sound. But yeah, that's probably where you're going to live if you're a blues and rock player. We go into the next segment, now we get into the higher gain sounds. You can hear how that compresses and drives a lot more, so I can push the drive a bit more now. Now you hear when I got to the top of that segment, it started to compress a bit more. It's a little bit more open there. Then it gets a bit more compressed because now we're entering into that more compressed, higher gain, almost fuzzy section. So that is, there's still quite a lot of gain there, but it's not, as saturated as a fuzz would be. Some of my favorite tones are kind of between section 3 and 4. I really like the higher gain section, but with the gain just brought back a little bit. You get this kind of high headroom bluesy thing, and then obviously as you push the gain, that's great for playing rock. Obviously, once we've decided on what our kind of gain mood is, then we can start setting the pedal up with the other controls. So at the moment, I've just got everything neutral. So I'm just going to go back to the kind of tube screamery type setting, so we can explore what the other controls are doing. Now, I mentioned the pre-tone and the post-tone are different EQs that react to different parts of the clipping stage. So the pre-tone is what your guitar sends into the pedal. So if you're using a guitar with single coils or bright humbuckers, you could turn the pre-tone down to darken the input signal. And if you're using quite dull humbuckers or dark single coils and you want to boost it up, you can boost that. And what that means is you're sending a brighter or a darker signal into the clipping stage. So let me just move that control and play a little bit so you can hear what it does. So the pickups on this are quite bright, so I think this really comes alive with the pre-tone set a little bit lower. It adds that nice body to the sound. If I was using some really dark pickups, I could boost that pre-tone. That would work actually quite nice on the P90 and the neck because I can add some brightness to that. So it's great for that kind of thing. You can really fine-tune the input signal. Then the post tone is what goes on after the clipping. So once you've got your guitar sound dialed in, you can then dial in your post tone, which is the overall EQ that you're mostly hearing after the clipping. So if I turn that down, it's going to be darker, and up is brighter. Now, you can dial in your perfect tone with just a combination of those two if you want. You can go, obviously, for some extremes like this. Now, you probably wouldn't use it in those extremes, but just to give you an example there of how far you can go with those EQ controls. So for me, I like the pre-tone about there and the post-tone with just a little push above the kind of middle position. And then we've got the mid control. So the mid control, we can either go really scooped or really mid forward. So you can kind of think of this like that, you know, the scooped is the, if you're playing with gain, you get that more scooped high gain American kind of metal sound. And then the mid side is the more British side. So you kind of think of it like American amps versus British amps with that mid control as well. So that, again, very wide-ranging control. Now, the three basically EQ controls, the pre, post, and the mid control, all work together. So if you're finding that, you know, you want a kind of a more British voice and you boost that mid, but your tone's quite bright, like that's quite bright, I would then maybe dial the post tone back a little bit. Just to get my perfect sound there. Now you can use those three controls along with the mood control to dial in some different kind of reference tones. So let's say I want a low gain overdrive with a bit more of a scoop American sound. I could do something like this. That's great for like American bluesy sounds. You can have a really scooped clean boost. If you wanted a tube screamery kind of tone, you could go to that middle position, push the mids up. Now, obviously, that doesn't sound exactly like a tube screamer because I'm not A-Bing it against one, but a tube screamer famously scoops off some of the low end, so we can use the pre-control there to bring off some lows. But then you can kind of come up with your own variations on those pedals. So if you love the Tube Screamer sound, you can A/B it against the real Tube Screamer, dial in that sound, then bring some lows back in. That is usually how I would set the pedal. I like that slightly more mid-pushed because I like really scooped amps, so I'm using a 6L6 amp there, which has a bit more of an American flavour, but I like to push the mids back in with this pedal. If you're a metal player, go to that fourth segment, and then you've kind of got the best of both worlds. With the mids up, you kind of get that British Marshall-y kind of sound. And if you're a fan of more American style stuff like thrash metal, get those mids down, bring some top end back into the mix and push the gain a bit more. And you can get some of those kind of sounds. Obviously that could be a bit brighter, so I can do this and get a brighter metal sound. So that in itself is incredibly versatile. The fuzzier stuff is pretty fun if you just want some really cool high gain guitar sounds. This is really reactive to the different controls. So if you boost the mid here, it's quite a unique sound. It's kind of like boxy in a weird way. It sort of does have like an extreme low end shelf there, but it's really good. A really good sound for lead playing. I think it's quite articulate. I think that would cut through in a mix really nice. You could also make that quite boomy if you wanted. So get those tone controls down, keep those mids up. Probably not a sound you would use all the time, but that's quite an interesting sound actually. Maybe let's get a bit more brightness back into that. That almost verges on like a glitchy kind of fuzz sound there as well, which is quite fun. It's got that sort of slightly spluttery thing going on. It's so versatile that you can literally dial in any sound you want. So the other cool thing is the preset mode, like I said. So let's say this kind of fuzzy sound. That's going to be my preset. Okay, that's my favorite lead sound. So I've got my sound dialed in. I'm going to hold the preset knob for 2 seconds, and the LED is going to flash. And because this is plugged in, you heard an audible pop there. So maybe don't do that on stage, because that would pop through your rig, unless you mute it, of course. So that now is saved as a preset. So if I press the preset button in this current setting, all it's going to do is call up those exact settings that you've just seen. So obviously there's no difference there because that is my preset. So let's say my rhythm tone is going to be a lower gain drive, kind of like what I was using earlier on, this kind of thing. That's my core rhythm tone. Now that isn't saved, so that is only functioning with the settings you see there in front of you. If I press the preset, it's going to go back to that fuzzy sound that I just dialed in, not including these settings here. These settings are for this side of the pedal. So if I press the preset, you can see how I can go back and forth between those two things. So turning the preset off automatically returns the pedal to the physical settings on top of the unit. So even though it is a single-sided overdrive, you can use the preset to kind of create a second side, which I think is really cool. So in that way, you could use it as 2 different pedals. You could have like a tube screamer on one side and, you know, a clon on the other side. Or you could use it as the same sound, but with a slight gain and level boost on the volume control for, you know, lead boosts, or just a higher gain version of the same sound for different passages in the song. There's really an unlimited number of things you can do with this pedal, because it can basically be whatever you actually want it to be. It doesn't actually limit itself to 6 controls and 1 sound, which I think is incredible. As someone who tours a lot, something like this is an invaluable tool, because I can use this for any gig to get any sound I want, and it pairs great with any guitar type. Because of that pre-tone knob, you can literally pair it with any pickups and it works. So yeah, there it is, the Kernom Ridge. This might just be the most versatile overdrive on the market, and I'm yet to find an overdrive that I've consistently been able to get so many great sounds out of. My kind of approach to overdrive, and what I've always done in my own rig, is whatever overdrive pedal I like or whatever I'm using, I have a sound that I use that pedal for. So for my tube screamers or for my King of Tone or whatever I'm using, I have one setting on them that is kind of my favorite setting, and that's what it does in my rig. But with something like this, it can be anything. So I really like this as, you know, the kind of thing that if I'm going to a different gig than my normal gig and I need a couple of new sounds, I can dial them in quickly here. But also as a studio tool, you could literally take one pedal to the studio and do everything. If you're traveling light for a show, you can only take a small pedal board. You can take that instead of 2 different drive pedals. Or like I even said earlier in the video, pair this with a MIDI switcher and you've got 128 different overdrive pedals right there in one box. So yeah, incredibly versatile. And I think this is something that a lot of guitar players are probably going to need to have in their toolkit. So yeah, check this thing out. There's some links down below where you can find out more about the Kernom Ridge. What do you guys think about the sounds of this thing? Let me know down below in the comments. While you're letting me know what you think of the sounds of this, don't forget to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching as always.